There we go.
Hello, everybody. This is John Bishop here, and I'm with my good friend, Dr. Nancy Flournoy, and Amelia, and Virginia, and Philip. Thanks for joining us today. I'm on a different time zone here in Tokyo, Japan. So it is 10:32 a.m. here the following day, and you guys are a day earlier. So 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and where Philip is, that's 8:30, right? Okay, so we're going to get to kick off this really exciting webinar today that Dr. Flournoy is going to present for us. So Nancy, why don't you give us a little bit of your background first before we get started with the presentation?
Well, I was just going to say that I am not a medical doctor. I am a PhD and trained in biomathematics. So I bring a different perspective. I spent most of my career, virtually all my career, in the medical research, doing medical research. And so I've been around medical science for decades, many decades. And so I'm familiar with a lot of medicine, but the Lifewave phototherapy was all new to me, and I have benefited from the patches personally. My husband's benefited from the patches personally, but as a scientist, I've been really interested in, what they're actually doing and how they work. And so that's led me to develop these talks. And each time I go to give a talk, I research a little bit more on the molecules that the patches are supposed to be affecting and what that means to your body. And then I'm sharing this with you. So it's all, I've been through the patches a couple times now. Each time I learn something new, and each time I share something new with you. So I consider it a exploration, and I really enjoy preparing the talks, and I hope that you enjoy listening to them. So with that, I guess I will share my screen and start the talk.
Okay, thank you, Nancy.
Okay, let's see. Let's play from start. So does that look good to everybody?
Yep, that looks good.
Okay, so today we're talking about the Nirvana patch. And there's a patch, and there's also a supplement that goes with it. And these are advertised as improving your mood. Now, one thing one has to realize is that David Schmidt, who's the developer of the Lifewave technology, works at a pretty basic level, pretty fundamental level. So when he develops a patch to do a specific thing, he's going kind of to the root of something very important. And in that regard, what he does is going to have the effects of the patch's activity is going to be quite broad. And given that it's quite broad, he then has to decide how he's going to advertise it. And so, so this one is, the Nirvana is advertised to improve your mood, whatever that means, but we're going to learn a little more broadly and a little more deeply what is actually meant by that. Now, what I have on this lead-in screen is on the right, there is what they call a sleeve, which is the package that the patches come in, and you can see there's 30 of them, which if you took one every day, if you used one every day, that would be a month's supply. And then the box of the supplements, which we'll talk about later. But the other information here on this slide is what the FDA has said that the company can claim, which means that they have had enough clinical evidence to support what is on this slide. And so just to begin, I'll read that to you. So the supplement, so the supplement supports healthy endorphin. I think I've got these backwards. The boxes are backwards. The patch is on the left and the other one's on the right. So the patch supports healthy endorphin production to enhance mood. And we'll talk about what endorphins are. And the process, it's stabilized. So the effects are going to be sustained. Well, this actually is the pocket. So anyway, the supplement, sorry to be confused here. The supplement includes natural extracts of seaweed, vanilla, and sea salt oil. So we'll discuss what those are and what they do in combination. And then the patch itself enhances mood and it has sustained results. So that doesn't say a lot. So we need to really get into it. As an overview, all of the Lifewave patches are patented proprietary form of phototherapy. They're targeted, passive, wireless nanotechnology, and they have essentially a nano antenna. They broadcast, they take the heat from your body, use it to drive the crystal to reflect certain wavelengths back into your body. No drugs, no chemicals, no stimulants, just nice light. So, David Schmidt, so sometimes it's clear from the name of the patch what the patch is going to do, and sometimes we have to kind of wait to get hints from David, who is the CEO, as to what he designed the patch to do. And so what he said at this particular talk in 2022 is that Nirvana elevates dopamine and beta endorphins. So that's where we're going to see what that means. That when you have your dopamine and your beta endorphins enhanced, what's that do for you? So the first thing I have here is a little slide on the little figure on the right, which points out there's four major chemicals that are known to make you happy. And the two on the right, dopamine and endorphins, those are the ones that we're talking about. So the dopamine is known as the reward chemical, and it gets released when you do something pleasurable to make you want to do it again. And the endorphins are primarily known as a painkiller. And we'll, again, talk more broadly about both of these. But the other two major chemicals are serotonin and oxytocin. And we'll talk about those in the context of other patches at other times. I should say that when I gave this talk on Nirvana the last time, I was thinking, was exploring, well, what is mood and how do you affect mood? And thinking that the most extreme negative mood is depression. And so I spent a few slides talking about depression. And I've taken those slides out of this talk because what I've read since is that although dopamine has a bit to do with depression, of alleviating depression, and I'll mention that, the main chemical that is known to be related to depression is serotonin. And so that we will save for another day. And oxytocin is the chemical that makes the mother want to breastfeed her baby. And it has broader implications as well for at least one of the other patches. But our talk today will be focused on dopamine and endorphins. So endorphins, the actual name comes from a shortened form of endogenous morphine. There's actually 4 different kinds of endorphins, and the one that the patch aims at increasing is known as beta endorphins. So when I talk about endorphins, I'm talking about beta endorphins. They are naturally produced in the pituitary gland, and we'll have a picture of that. But the naturally produced endorphins are not addictive like like morphine, for example, which is the like the chemical morphine if you take morphine, and it's actually more powerful on a amount by amount basis. The morphine that you make yourself is more powerful than the morphine you might get from your doctor. So one of the tricky things about endorphins, in terms of keeping you feeling like you have you're in well-being, is that they're metabolized very quickly. So they degrade. Their half-life, that's the time in which it takes to be down to half as much as you have to start with, is 2 hours. So in order to feel good, which most of us want to feel good, not delirious necessarily, but good, you have to keep making your endorphins. You can't you can't just do them in the morning and forget them and not do it until the next morning, or else you're going to have a bad night. So a little bit more about then mood, just as a concept here, because that's, I don't know, people, when people start talking about mood and happy, it all seems to me a little bizarre. And so I try and bring it down to earth, in that it's kind of like the difference between adrenaline and feeling like you have energy. If you're all jacked up on coffee, that's bad. But if you're just full of energy, that's good. And so I see mood and happy in sort of the same sense. That is, we would like to be happy. We'd like to be in a good mood. And that doesn't mean that we are sort of weirded out by it. But the comment that's made on this slide is that your mood, although things you do in your daily life affect your mood, that a large part of your emotional response is driven by chemical reactions in your body. And there are two different kinds: neurotransmitters and hormones. And the neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers that are going to tell different parts of your body to react as if you are happy or not happy. And your hormones, that actually are substances that are in the fluids of your body, like your blood and your lymphs, and they tell other cells, they stimulate other cells and tissues to go do something. So we'll be talking both about neurotransmitters and hormones. And they're responsible for, however they got turned on or turned off, they are then responsible for the emotions that you experience. So I put on the right-hand side of this slide the tuning fork and the little picture of electricity, just to, particularly if you think of a nerve you think of the nerve and you think of a signal going down the nerve. Most of us were raised with the notion of electricity traveling down a wire as kind of a straight line event, that just a very pointed straight line event. And now, well, I mean, it's been a while, Maxwell a long time ago, but the reality that electricity doesn't travel that way is now entering our science and entering our lives. And so the picture on the bottom is to remind us that energy really travels in these waves, and it takes up a lot of space around that line, and that it has a resonance to us, which is what I'm connotating to you with the tuning forks, that the messages and the regulatory functions can be transmitted and evoked by more like sound than a pinpoint. Okay, so that's that slide. Now, what's going on with mood as far as our brain is concerned? Well, there's a combination of different organs in the brain that are called the limbic system. So they're named here: the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, this little blue one. Or excuse me, the pituitary gland is the one that's hanging down here. We'll see several pictures of it, but it's just a little tiny thing, and it hangs off the hypothalamus. And then there's the amygdala, I can't say it right, and the hippocampus. So the two that are not really related to this talk are the amygdala, which is going to stimulate you into your flight and fight response, and the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory processing and not just memory processing, particularly as it's related to relating your memory to emotions. So it has a connection with mood, in that the mood that you're in is going to be reflected in the way you remember certain events. And that process is going on in the hippocampus. But we're primarily focused today on the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So these four organs in this limbic system, they, as a collection, they deal with the basic drives, emotions, and memory. So they're pretty fundamental. And if you look at this, coming up from your neck, you have the brainstem. And so this whole collection is just sitting right on top of the brainstem. And it's a very important location in your brain for a lot of the way we live and we perceive life. So the hypothalamus is responsible for hunger, thirst, body temperature, and pleasure. And in turn, it regulates the pituitary gland. And some hormones are produced in the pituitary gland, and one of them, and that includes the endorphins, which is what we're talking about. And not only does the pituitary gland produce hormones itself, but it sends signals to other glands to produce other hormones. And I'll show you a picture of that. So this is just a little blow up to, again, of the pituitary gland. And when I first started to prepare this talk, I was thinking, okay, we'll talk about endorphins, and then we'll talk about dopamine, because those were the two things that David had mentioned are elevated with the Nirvana patch. And I'll show you a couple more slides, but one of the things that becomes clear, and it was clear in the last talk that he gave, is that you can't really separate these things out. They're very interrelated with each other. And so here we have a picture of the pituitary gland as it's hanging off the hypothalamus. And one can see that the optic nerve comes right in here at the same place. So these functions are really influenced by what you see and what comes at you through your eye as well. But the point on this slide was just to relate this pituitary gland and the hypothalamus again to, we just talked about the pituitary gland making endorphins. And here we have dopamine it gets released in the blood vessels that supply the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is getting flooded and bathed and washed in dopamine. So they're obviously, really connected with each other. Now, this is the picture that shows you how interrelated all of the hormones are. And let me just show you a little bit. So here's the brain up here at the top. There's little tiny areas, the area we've been talking about, which is blown up below. And so the hypothalamus is up here at the top, and these two little, they look like little testicles. Those are the pituitary glands. And what you see coming out of here is that these blue arrows are the messages that come out of the pituitary gland, and they go to all these organs that you may recognize, the adrenal glands, the thyroid glands, the testes, and they tell those organs to produce the hormones that those organs produce or not to. So the pituitary gland is really, well, I would say really controlling a lot the hormonal system. But the other thing to notice is that they loop back around. So not only does the message go out to tell the organs to produce the hormones that they produce, but then there's this feedback loop that is going to come back to the pituitary and the hypothalamus, so that all of these things, I mean, you can think of an orchestra, they're all, ideally, they're all in a nice, positive, synchronous relationship with each other. And I got to thinking of talking about it in this way because of this big long name here, which is like, can't imagine pronouncing, pro-opiomelanocortin. Okay, and everybody sees it as POMC. So why do I put this up here? Well, when David Schmidt talked about nirvana at that 2022 talk, he digressed into talking about this molecule. And it was sort of out of context. But what, so I had to look it up, of course, because I wanted to know. And so I'll tell you. So this is like the mother of all the hormones and neuropeptides, and it's also called the archetypical precursor. So if you look on the left, the brain starts out with this molecule, and it chops a little bit off, and it gets a little piece here, and then it sort of snips it into pieces, and you get various other things. The ACTH ends up being what goes to the adrenals and controls your cortisol and food intake and a few other things. But over here, there's this other branch, this other piece of it that gets broken off, and this is the beta endorphins. So they come off of this molecule, and so you kind of, David can only talk about what he's permitted to talk about, given, what his lawyers say he can claim. But the only thing, so why would he talk about this overarching molecule that makes everything? And I can think of two possible explanations. One is that this is the molecule that he's really targeting, and the endorphins and the dopamine are what he can measure. So that's what he tells us about, and that's what he tells the FDA about. And the other explanation would be that he's very aware of that feedback loop, and that if the patch affects the endorphins and the dopamine, it'll run through the system and come back and stimulate the production of this mother of all hormone. So that's my speculation. And as I say, he went on and on about this molecule. So when he does that, I figure it's important. It just takes a while to figure out why. So this molecule works both in the hypothalamus and in the pituitary. And in the hypothalamus, well, and it's sort of what we said in the last slide, but it impacts on appetite and energy and body composition. And in the pituitary, the article I was reading tied it to the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So if you go back to this, I want to go back to this other slide. You know, what they're saying is here's the pituitary, and they're focusing on here's the adrenal gland, and then coming back again to the hypothalamus. But basically, you know, referring again to this feedback system. So it is just one more slide, a little bit redundant, but here's this long molecule, which is this POMC, and it works in the pituitary and it works in the hypothalamus, where it well, you know, the science is not always terribly consistent. But at any rate, it gets down to the adrenal glands or it gets to endorphins. And there is a lot they have yet to learn. So if you're in good physical health, your endorphins are getting produced as they should when you do things that are positive. Well, or I mean, you might not think crying's positive, but when you exercise, you laugh. If your crying is positive and that you're having a release, if you yawn, you're producing endorphins. You get a massage, you have meditation, you have an orgasm. All of those things will produce endorphins. And here's a connection to depression, is if your endorphins are not properly absorbed in your brain and your spine, then there's a problem with endorphin receptions, and you'll get, and if you have elevated levels, then you're going to get this sense of free floating and not really being here. And it's a description that often is associated with endorphins or with depression. So as I said, we talk a little more broadly. When you think of endorphins, when most people think of endorphins, they think of pain relief. That's the number one description that you find for beta endorphins. But they're also analgesic. They give you in euphoria. They're anti-inflammatory. They reduce fever. And this is interesting. They promote nerve connections. So, I mean, that's obviously you want your nerves connected. They regulate skin pigmentation and hair growth. They maintain your epidermal thickness. So like, you know, old folks, your skin gets thin. The endorphins are one component that makes your skin nice and supple, and they increase collagen synthesis. So that's all, those are all good things. The other thing that beta endorphins are known for is the runner's high. And this is associated with their activity as a pain suppressor. And so when, you know, the runner runs and runs and runs and runs and runs, and he should be feeling a lot of pain, but the pituitary releases these endorphins and they block the receptor sites so that the message that you're in pain doesn't get to your brain. And they also increase your dopamine production. So here's the connection between, here's a connection between your endorphins and your dopamine. Okay, so just before we finish talking about endorphins, I want to get back to the sort of the wavelength connection. And this is usually talked about in the context of sleep. And so, so these are frequencies from your brain, and they're the ones that are very rapid are called gamma, and a little less rapid are beta, a little less rapid are alpha, still less rapid are delta or theta, and then, you know, sort of smoothed out are delta. And so So I'm going to talk about the delta on the next slide with respect to endorphins, but I just want to say a couple of things here in general, in case you're not used to thinking about your brain waves. And that is, if you're in gamma or beta, you really want to do something about it. This is, well, I mean, you might be in gamma if you're being chased by the tiger and you want to run, but for normal life, those are stressed out states. It's also the states where some people, and maybe you even have at some time, had this incessant chatter in your mind and you can't shut it up. And it just goes on, and your brain's always talking and going through the grocery list and going through what somebody did to you last week, and on and on and on and on. And so if that's happening to you, you're up here in beta and gamma. And I say you want to do something about it, and you can, you can meditate, you can get audio training for your brain waves. That's what I did. Train my brain waves to come down. But you definitely want to look for doing something about it if that's where you are. In kind of a normal activity, it's nice to be an alpha, because that's where you're alert, but you're relaxed. So, you're just really smooth driving in terrible conditions, or it's a great state to be in if you're going to take an exam. But we get down here to delta, and this is where the body's going to help repair itself. And so with respect to training your brain waves, and we get on the next slide and we're talking about endorphins, I just want you to realize that you can train your brain into these lower wavelengths, and that while almost universally the delta wave state is associated with sleep, there are people who can function in society with a delta wavelength while they're awake, and that they're pretty incredible. So here's just a little like a timeline, but it's a Hertz line of the delta brain waves between 0.5 Hertz and 4 Hertz, kind of starting from the top and getting smaller. So this range here, 0.5 Hertz to 1.5 Hertz, are where you're going to get natural pain relief through through the endorphin release is going to stimulate natural pain relief. And so what's in purple is a little breakdown of those sections. And at 1 Hertz, you're going to feel good, and the pituitary is going to stimulate the release of a number of things to help you recover from your day or your week or your life, injuries and muscles and whatever damage you've done. So down at a Hertz, you can get healthy. When you get a little bit lower, you're in a euphoric state. And if you're lower yet, you can relieve yourself of severe headaches and be in complete relaxation. I put these ones in green just to show you that a lot of good things happen a little higher, like your nerves regenerate. You can get pain relief, on migraine relief, even at 2.5 Hertz. And you're having nice restful sleep if you're at 3 and well, almost close to 3.5 Hertz. So that's the brainwave frequency interpretation of what's going on. So just a moment about, I'm going to talk about dopamine a little bit more, but so let's just talk about what the difference is between endorphins and dopamine before I go on. And so endorphins are actually going to bind to opioid receptors in the central nervous system, and dopamine is released and you feel pleasure. Okay, that's kind of the big bullet items. And then in terms of function, the endorphins are hormones that inhibit the mechanism that communicates the signals of pain. We saw that. And dopamine is actually the messenger. It's a neurotransmitter that sends the messages that motivates you not to feel pain or not pain, but to want to do something again, to want to work for a reward, to go out and accomplish what you want to accomplish. So a few words about dopamine, which as I just started to say, it increases your level of arousal. It makes you want to do something, want to search out something. Makes me want to make this talk, I guess, because why else would I do it? Increases your goal-directed behavior. And then it's most known for this reward-seeking loop that you do something, you get pleasure from it, and then you're going to get this dopamine result that's going to make you feel good, and you're going to want to do it again. Now, one that doesn't quite get as much attention when people are just, if you just look up things on dopamine without going further, and that's this relationship to motor function. And I'll say a little bit more about these things. But first, let's look at where dopamine comes from. And so here we have our brain stem, and it looks like basically the same area. Here's the hypothalamus, here's the pituitary gland. The dopamine's actually produced in nerve cells at the base of the brain, and that's what these little oval things are. And then you can see that instead of going out to all the hormones like the endorphins did, this is going up to different parts of the brain that will then communicate to the rest of the body. So they go up right to the cortex. It's acting directly on our brain. So here's a laundry list of things that it plays a role in. And again, when we see long lists like this, you know that there's got to be something fundamentally basic about dopamine that is then having a lot of cascading effects in order to do such a wide variety of, to be involved in such a wide variety of things. So we'll just talk about a few of these. We already said most of what's on here, that dopamine is involved in your pleasure and reward seeking. We've talked about dopamine, well, not directly being related to addiction, but we said it's like morphine. So in particular, cocaine and amphetamines block the reabsorption of dopamine. So you end up with more dopamine in your system. So you're going to feel that dopamine high. And they work by different mechanisms. And amphetamines actually increase the dopamine level by kind of forcing, they push the dopamine molecules out of where they're being stored and into your into the more fluid activity of your system. So both of them are addictive. This is the slide I have on dopamine in movement. So first, let's talk about where that happens. There's this part of your brain called the basal ganglia. And again, it's pretty much in this, oh, here's the brain stem coming up. It's a little more into the center of the brain than where we've been talking. But whereas your cerebral cortex up here higher is going to decide to do something, it's what's going to decide to make your body walk, or you're going to get up, or you're going to sit down, or you decide what to do. But it's the ganglia, this basal ganglia down here, further deeper into your brain, that makes it happen smoothly. So when you don't have enough dopamine, your movements are going to be delayed and uncoordinated. And, we've seen people that struggle with how they move. And when you have too much dopamine, you're going to, have tics, and you can't, movements that you can't stop, that are repetitive. So abnormal dopamine levels are associated with Parkinson's disease and drug addiction. So those are pretty important. Whoops. A word about prolactin secretion. So that's a substance that part of your comes from your mammary gland, a woman's, where you're going to have milk production, and the prolactin stimulates the breast cells to make milk, but the dopamine inhibits this production. So dopamine is not good if you're trying to nurse baby. Not very good. And then we've said most about we've talked about pain processing in a variety of ways. And so I don't think we need to say more about this slide. Now, in cognition, dopamine controls the flow of information it goes to the frontal lobes. We saw how it came out of the center of the brain, and it goes up to the front area of the brain, and from there it controls the flow of information around your brain. Now that's pretty darn important, and maybe in a later talk I'll explore this and what's going on here, or what they know about what's going on here. But it's really involved in memory, attention, and problem solving. So those are all pretty, even if you don't care if you're happy or not, I want to be a grump, I'm happy being a grump, you probably care about whether your memory and whether you can pay attention to something and solve problems. Now, again, in the prefrontal cortex, up in the front of the brain, well, we already mentioned memory over here, so this is just another statement that it's going to help you improve your memory. But it also, it's a balance. It has to be right. It's like Goldilocks, not too little, not too much, just right. And attention, we showed how close to the brain the visual cortex comes in, right at the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and your vision actually helps the dopamine respond, hopefully appropriately. And that's another connection we might explore more on another talk. So not established yet, but it is thought that dopamine may be responsible for what you keep in short-term memory, which is pretty darn important. And then that it's related to attention deficit disorder. So this connection between dopamine and attention and memory, this is all pretty interesting. Now, we showed that whole thing going down to the kidneys and the adrenal glands and all. So dopamine is actually a precursor of adrenaline. And adrenaline is, of course, your fight or flight hormone. So this slide just, again, makes that connection. And I liked this picture. I mean, this is the hypothalamus coming out here and the little pituitary gland hanging off of it. But I think it's the word hypothalamus actually comes from Greek, maybe an ancient word that means seahorse. And so when you get this little graphic of this whole system as they have shown it in this particular schematic, you see the little seahorse there in the brain, and then the adrenal glands, and the fact that what's going on up here in the brain is so directly related to what's going down there in your kidneys. It's really pretty amazing. When you have a deficiency in dopamine, your body makes cortisol. And cortisol does its own things with relating to stress, but when you don't have enough dopamine, it works as a backup energy hormone, which you really don't want, because now things are really getting out of whack. And I have a little schematic down here of all the things that cortisol affects. And so if you are stealing the cortisol to use to make up for the fact that you don't have dopamine, then there's going to be all kinds of contaminant problems that happen. So, I mean, the whole thing is so miraculously woven together. It's pretty incredible. So these are the sites that are recommended for Nirvana patch placement. And, you know, one also needs to be aware that the sites that are recommended are, they're only allowed to recommend the sites they've actually done clinical studies for. So there are lots of places that and uses that people are developing and that are being talked about online that are other places in other ways. These are good. These will help. But just because they don't mention something else doesn't mean it's not a good place too. I'll mention that just a minute. But we have the third eye. Most of the spots are major acupuncture sites because they have shown that the energy from the patch will get picked up by the acupuncture meridian system, and it'll help to carry it through the body to where it needs to go. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about the hypothalamus, and there's a site that's not on here that is actually SP6, and there's a patch that's named after that site, and that site's on the inside of the left leg. And in a number of talks, David has stressed that that site is a energetic superhighway to the hypothalamus. So you saw everything that goes on in the hypothalamus, and if you want to try and stimulate it, make it resonate more coherently, one might try that spot on the left leg, and that's exactly what we're doing with my husband right now, because he has some brain abnormality right at that site. And so we are trying a number of patches, including the Nirvana patch, at that leg site, and maybe I'll tell you about it after we have more experience. A word about the supplement before we finish up, because I sort of thought it was kind of a weird, like, little extra, didn't pay much attention to it at first. And then I started looking up these ingredients online, and it was totally captivating. So the ingredients is like vanilla extract. And I had never realized, the nice chemical properties of vanilla extract before, and how the different kinds of vanilla are rated differently, and the Tahiti vanilla is right up there. And then this they call it a dried plant, and David, it's labeled as a seaweed, but it's a plant that grows in the sea where there's like a low tide. And then oil extract of sea salt, not sea salt by itself, but oil extract of sea salt. And so that's an interesting combination. And when you, oh, I guess I have something a little bit about these. Okay, so this particular vanilla bean is an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, and neuroprotective effects. All shown in animals, not much research in humans, but that gives me a whole new take on vanilla. And this, so here it's called a brown algae. You know, it's a plant that grows in the sea. It's also called the peacock's tail, and it's grown almost around the world. And it preserves collagen. And they think it might be doing that by inhibiting an enzyme that degrades hyaluronic acid. So we've got those things. And then when you combine them all together, what you do is block the degradation of the beta endorphins. So remember, we talked at the beginning, the beta endorphins only have a 2-hour half-life. So if you can get in there and instead of having a 2-hour half-life, you've got a 4-hour half-life, you've just made a big impact on how this whole system is working to your benefit. So together, they're kind of amazing, and there are testimonies online to their effectiveness. And I will sum up with a disclosure. As I mentioned, I'm not a doctor. I don't, and the company doesn't make claims for healing with this patch or any of the other patches. They are wellness patches, and if you are in a real bad shape, you should go talk to your doctor. And I am really thankful because I took the patches to my doctor and she now uses them. So I am the lucky one there to have a doctor who I can communicate with. And I would like to thank you for joining me. And I am talking now again on the first and third Fridays of each month. And we'll take a different patch each time. And I look forward to seeing you again. Oh, there's a chat. Somebody in the chat. Can somebody see that for me?
Yes, I think that was Carla. Thanks, Carla, for joining us today. Thank you, Nancy. That was wonderful. I'd like to open it up for question and answer. That's usually what we do at the end of the presentation. If anybody'd like to unmute and yeah, ask any question that you'd like to Dr. Flournoy.
Hi, Carla. Did you have a question? I haven't seen the chat yet. Oh, thank you so much. Well, you're so welcome.
No, I just wanted to say thank you. It was very informative, and I really enjoyed your slides on the brain. I was just absorbing what you were saying, and then I was listening to, you know, what you were saying on the placements and even putting the patch on the left leg. So it's definitely a talk that I want to look back at.
Yeah. Oh, good, good. Yeah, on the left leg, if you look at the Lifewave instructions as to where to put the SP6 patch, you'll see it's about 1 hand length. But if you put your hand on top of your, what do you call that little bony thing?
Well, on the side there.
On the side, yeah, and go up about 1 hand length and stick the patch there. That's where it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing how people are playing with the placements.
Yeah, acupuncture meridians. Yeah.
Nancy, I read or heard somewhere that another easy way to find that spot is if you run your finger up from that bone.
Yeah.
When you hit that spot, it's tender.
Oh, I think that's true. Again, you can find it. That's true with really all the acupuncture spots. So there's two ways to look. One is it should hurt when you press it a little bit, and the other is it tends to be a depression. You know, it's like there's a little, like here on your shoulder. It's where the shoulder kind of goes in, and you know, on the knee. If you look, there's a little dip most of the time. So anyway, you know, when in the earlier talks, they were very it seemed like they were trying to be very precise about where you put them. And I think that this whole sense of the patches resonating in a broader area, I think they have come to feel that you don't have to be so precise, because David will now say things, talking about, people that have a hard time dealing with the patch for one reason or another. Either they have an allergic reaction to the sticky stuff or whatever. And so he says, just put it in your pocket. So I don't know what he knows, but I'm just saying the precision with which they were trying to operate when they began, and when they started to prove that all these things happened, they seem to be backing off on the necessity for it. So
Well, I know the Nirvana patch, I can feel it's really helped me since I've been a month in Tokyo, which is the biggest city in the world. There's 37 million people here. It's like a giant beehive. So, I had moved, as Philip knows, and Nancy.
how does the Nirvana, what do you say?
Well, it just and I have, of course, the supplement to go with it, the patches. It just brings a calming effect that I put actually on my right side here, right in that little indention point. And no, I started as soon as I got here, I started using it, and I just really felt like it kind of helped my, it just helped the
transition
flow of the day go better,
Cool.
and yeah, I think it's great. I think it's a great product.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.